All right, welcome back to more Solidity smart contract hacking here. And in this one, we're going to cover a vulnerability that is not, as it says, not specifically performed on Solidity smart contracts themselves, but on third-party applications that may interact with them. This is the short address parameter attack. So the vulnerability with this one is when you pass parameters to a smart contract, the parameters are encoded, and it's encoded according to this ABI specification, which you can find it in the Solidity docs here. And we're not going to get down into the weeds of it. Basically, there's a certain encoding format that it uses. And essentially, you know, that encoding will look something like this, right? There's a lot of padding going on with zeros when you send this stuff. So you might have a transfer function in Solidity where you might take in an address type of a variable to uint type for a variable tokens and return a Boolean for like success, for example, right? And then if you wanted to, say you wanted to transfer 100 tokens, this is what the encoded result. So when you encode it according to the ABI specification, you'll end up with the encoded result that will look something like this. So you see here, these first bytes here, that corresponds to the transfer function signature, right? The signature selector for the transfer function. And then you got these zeros. And then right here is the address that we passed. That's basically the encoded format for, say, like an example address as specified here, the to address. And then we have the Boolean success. Well, here we have this one here is the hex that corresponds to 100 tokens, right? So we have the value, right? So this will be the 100 tokens. Now, the issue is that if our code isn't very smart, we don't add error checking, right? We're not validating the input, that's the main issue at play here. Let's say they're not validating that the address is a legitimate address, right? They're not validating that. Then a user could potentially send a address that is not of the correct length, right? So typically, we're looking for 20 bytes, which is 40 hex characters. But say, for example, if we're not validating, we're not ensuring that the user is sending a 20 byte, 40 hex character address. Instead, they send, say, a 19 byte, 38 hex character address. As we see here with this, right? What it's going to do is it's going to pad those last two characters with zeros. And not only that, it also changes the value. See, this corresponded to 100 of the token. And it is pretty subtle. I don't know if you can tell, but here, this is actually a bigger number by quite a lot. So what could happen, right, if they put in the wrong address and we're not validating properly on our application, then not only could, if this address existed and it was someone else's address, we could send the money to the wrong address. We could also send more money than was intended to the wrong address. So that's like doubly bad. So basically, the reason for this is, let's see here. So in this example, right, if the exchange held this many tokens, like if you actually had that many to send, the user would withdraw instead of 100 tokens, 25,600 tokens, whilst the exchange thinks the user is only withdrawing 100 to the modified address. So, assuming that the attacker doesn't actually possess that address, this one here with the 2 zeros at the end, then, but it can be brute forced, right? They could get an address that has 2 zeros at the end and exploit someone, right? If they entered it wrong. They could easily steal the tokens, from an unsuspecting exchange. So this one is a bit of a stretch, but it does go to show you why it's so important for the developers to have an understanding of this and properly validate for this stuff. And that's basically the preventative technique here, right? Validate all inputs before sending them to the blockchain to prevent these kind of attacks. Now, there aren't any real world known. Also, the padding occurs at the end. The careful ordering of parameters in the smart contract could potentially mitigate some forms of this attack because it matters what order. When I say what order, I mean the order up here. But then as far as the real world examples, there's actually none that this guy was able to find, at least. And so this one is pretty tough to say, but yeah, nowadays, like, we would hope that all the apps we're using are validating their inputs. That's like step one, right? Not only to prevent this attack, but to prevent all kinds of other attacks, right? I mean, as attackers, we know just how many vulnerabilities out there stem from a lack of proper validation on the inputs. You always need to validate user input, of course. And that's pretty much it for this one. Pretty short video, not any POC code to go over, really. But something definitely good to be aware of. And in the next video, we're going to be covering unchecked call return values. So I'll see you guys right over in some of these other Ethereum exploits, Solidity smart contract exploit videos. If you want to catch up, I'll see you over there. Thanks for watching.